And by learning that today, you could instantly double the amount of food you've got in your garden. Hi everyone, welcome back to my garden. Apparently mine and Tama's garden. Stop sniffing. In my side driveway patch with my pallet planters, I'm going to share with you 10 tips so that you can grow more food from your home garden. These tips are really easy and you can start today and get them implemented so that you can boost your garden's production. And this will work no matter whether you live in an apartment or you have a rental garden with containers or you have a large veggie patch. Alright, so number one is to trim your herbs. Especially if they are starting to flower. Basil, mint, thyme can all be grown in pots, and trimming the tops will promote bigger, bushier plants. When plants get hot, stressed, or just left to grow, they'll send off flowers to produce seeds for another generation. Trimming off these seeds will let your herbs know that it's not time yet and to keep producing. Just chuck the tops and seeds back in the garden and they will sprout new plants, or you can also pop the purple stems in vinegar and make this vibrant basil infusion. You can then use this to make salad dressings with a little olive oil and lemon juice. Number two is plant quick growing crops. So there are a few things that will grow really quickly and you can plant those regularly throughout the season to get quick wins in the garden, get some quick food growing, especially if you are waiting for your other things to grow and you have a little bit of space in between. Two of my favourites are radish and rocket. So radishes are one of the quickest things to grow. They grow from seed to ready to pick and eat in just 28 days. And that is pretty hard to beat. And I just pop radish seeds in between other plants that I already have growing, and that works really well. Same with rocket, you can just pop some rocket in on the edges or in gaps, and rocket can grow in a little bit more shade, especially in summer like this. Rocket and radishes are fine to grow in the shade because they won't bolt and go to flower as much. So they are really good ones to pop in between other plants. And radishes not only provide a delicious crunchy vegetable, but you can also eat the leaves or the tops. So you can turn that into a pesto, into a chimichurri, and make a dressing for your radish salad. And if you aren't a fan of radish, you can try roasting them. Pop them in with your roast veggies, with your roast potato, sweet potato, pumpkin, and they are so delicious. I tried roasted radish last winter, and it's now one of my favorite things. It's sweet, it loses a little bit of that pepperiness, and especially if you coat it in herbs and spices. If you haven't tried roast radish, you definitely have to. And rocket is super easy to chuck in salads, to top on pizzas, to top on anything really. I just sprinkle baby rocket on everything. It's a little bit peppery, it adds heaps of nutrition, and it is super fresh. Alright, so number three is succession planting. So this can be done a few different ways, and one of them is that I like to plant lots of different varieties of the same thing. So I might plant a few different types of beans, or I might plant a few different types of tomatoes, and if I stagger those out a little bit by planting one lot of variety of seeds, and then a few weeks later I plant a different variety, that way I get to grow all these different varieties, but they're not going to be all ready at the same time, so I can have a little bit of succession there, and I'm not overwhelmed with so much at once. I can spread it out and get more food throughout the whole growing season. The other way that I like to succession plant is by sort of knowing when things are going to come to an end. So if you are getting a little bit closer to the end of your tomato season, or your tomatoes are halfway through growing, pop in more seeds, and you can even plant the seedlings down the bottom if you've got room. So that way your little seeds and seedlings will be up and starting to grow by the time you're ready to pull out the previous one. And so that way you're never starting from zero. You've always got a little bit of growth happening, not wasting any of your space left for unproducing food. You've got things on the go all the time. So I tend to plant seeds like generally every week I'm planting something so that I can pop that in spaces where things are finishing up and make the most of every space that I have. Alright, so number 4 is hand pollinate. So in an ideal world, you won't have to hand pollinate. You'll have lots of bees, lots of pollinators pollinating all of your fruits and vegetables, but that isn't always the case. So there's certain situations where this won't happen so much, and hand pollinating can really help ensure that you're going to get a decent harvest and you're going to get some fruit that will set and be ready to eat. So learning to hand pollinate and identify what flowers and which ones are male and which ones are female and which plants need to be hand pollinated and which ones are self-fertile is a really, really good idea, so that you can always have that skill on hand if you need it. And there are situations where this may be needed most of the time. If you live in an apartment and you have a balcony garden, you may not have many bees. Even if you plant lots of flowers in pots, there just may be a lot of times when you don't have bees. Flowers generally open in the morning and then they close. So if the bees aren't there, then your food hasn't been pollinated and it may just shrivel and die and not actually become edible. So hand pollinating in those situations, in like apartments, balcony gardens, if your garden is newly established and you haven't got a lot of flowering plants in the ground or flowering at the right times, then this could be another time when you really need to hand pollinate. Some of the main ones that you might want to hand pollinate are pumpkins, melons, squash, zucchini. They have male and female flowers, and you can use the male flowers to pollinate the female flowers, and that will ensure you get some really good harvests and boost your food production. So I've got an article on how to do that, and I'll leave the link for that below. Alright, so number 5 is feed your plants regularly. So as your plants are growing, they're using up nutrients, and it can be a really good idea if you are trying to really boost your food production is to feed your plants. So you can make your own organic fertilizers, and I have got a video on 15 different organic fertilizers you can make from home, so I'll link that for you if you want to check that out after this. But you can also use compost teas, liquid seaweed solution. There's heaps of different ways that you can feed your plants to help boost their growth and produce heaps more food. I like to feed my plants every 2 to 3 weeks. It really helps feed my plants, feed my soil, and really get things going. And number 6 is harvest regularly. Your plant's main goal is actually not to make delicious food to feed us humans, but to secure its future generations. If the plant believes it's had enough fruit or vegetables produced with seeds, it will slow or stop producing. Regularly picking your harvest when they're just ready will make the plant think that it's lost its seeds to predators, so it will continue to produce more and more. So try not to leave things too long on the plant once they look ready. This also reduces the risk of other critters nabbing your produce. Learn more about root to shoot. Conventionally, 30 to 50%, maybe even more of our food, our edible plants are thrown away, are discarded. By learning what parts of the plant are edible, you're going to maximize your food production. And by learning that today, you could instantly double the amount of food you've got in your garden. So have a look at what you've got growing, find out what parts of the plant are edible, and see if you can start getting creative with the recipes on using those leaves, using the stems, all the parts of the plant. Oh, smells so good. Some of the ones that I've got growing in my garden are like the sweet potato leaves, also zucchini flowers, pumpkin flowers, usually the male ones I'll use, and I can pop those in salads, you can stuff them. Some recipes for beetroot leaves, I've got a whole bunch of things, but that is something that we dive a lot deeper into with my membership, and I am constantly posting recipes on different ways to use the whole vegetable from root to shoot. Alright, so number 8 is plant perennials. So perennials are plants that last longer than 2 years. So our annuals, we plant them and they will grow for the season, then we harvest them and we take them out or they die. One of the reasons I love having perennials in the garden is that there's always food available. So these plants are always growing, they're well established, they will produce food sometimes seasonally, sometimes for the whole year, sometimes for half the year. depending on what plant that is, but they are well established. They have larger root systems in the ground, so they require a little bit less care, and I can spend more time on producing my annual crops that take a little bit more care and maintenance. So some perennials that I have got growing in my garden are perennial basil. I have my sweet potato is pretty much growing all year round. Obviously lots of fruit trees, berries, those sort of things that you can plant once and continue to get food off for many years to come. Other perennials that I like are rhubarb. I've just got some artichoke to plant. You've got your asparagus, all those things that you plant once and they'll continue to reward you with food. All right, so number 9 is to stack in time and space. So what that means is to stack in space is what I have here a lot in my pallet planters, is by utilizing the different layers of heights. So I have things growing on lower levels. I also have trellises on a lot of my gardens to utilize the back half of the container for vertically growing food. Vertical space is something that is super underutilized, and you can grow a whole lot more food if you start to incorporate some vertical growing design into your garden. The other part of that is growing in time. So that is by utilizing time and growth cycle of plants. So an example for that may be that you grow beans and you grow beans up a structure, and that creates some shade for a temporary time while the beans are growing, and then you can plant some things underneath those in the shade that might be a little bit more sensitive to the sun. So things like lettuce, or in summer things that might bolt, like root vegetables or something like that. You may be able to get a little bit of an extended harvest by utilizing the time that there is shade over that garden whilst you're growing something else. The other way to do that is also to plant things at the start or end of the plant cycles, so that you can know that that space is going to be utilized when that plant is going to be going dormant, or that plant is going to be coming to an end. You're already going to have things ready to go on the way up, so that you don't waste any parts of your garden. All right, so number 10 is one of my favorites, and that is utilize space by growing in containers. So you can do this no matter whether you have an apartment or a small garden, or even if you have large gardens, containers are still useful. There are certain things that you can grow that are better to be grown in containers than to be grown in the garden. So those are things like the plants that have quite invasive growingness are things like mint, that if you plant mint in the garden, it sends out runners and it will just go everywhere. It'll overtake, and you'll actually end up with less growing space because the mint will just smother everything. So growing mint in a container is a really good idea whether you have a big garden or a small garden. If you harvest it regularly by trimming it, then you're going to get a whole lot of food from that continuously in a small pot. Other reasons that you can grow in containers is to control the soil. So if you are growing things like blueberries that like a little bit more acidic soil, it's easier to control that in a pot rather than in the garden, and make the most of all the spots in your garden. So this area here gets really, really hot in summer, so I can move my containers out of the sun and pop them in the shade. And then again in the winter when there's less light, I can move those containers around to maximize the light, and that's going to maximize the amount of food that I can grow because I can control the amount of sunlight. So that is another reason I love growing in containers. And also you can utilize space that would ordinarily not be used. So on a lot of our properties, we can't put gardens everywhere as much as we would like to. There are areas that are either paved or concreted or are needed for other uses. So like this spot here is paved and is a second driveway. So if we need to use that, I can move my containers out of the way and use that as a driveway. So it's a temporary situation. And again, this can be really, really good if you are renting, growing in containers. You can really get some gardens established and then take them with you when you move. And that is something that I absolutely love. Fruit trees are going to take a long time to establish. So if you are renting and you plan on getting a property, planting some fruit trees in pots can be a really good idea, because you can get those established, you can learn about them, and then you can take them with you and you can plant them out into the garden when you do eventually get your own place. I also love that container gardens can just brighten up a space. I love this little area of my garden that had fences and pavers, and it has now got lots of lush edible veggies. I'm making the most out of this space and growing heaps more food. And that is my 10 tips to produce more food from your edible home garden. Let me know below if there is any that sparked inspiration for you. I would love to know. And be sure to hit that like button if you did find some useful information. And I will pop some videos here that you can watch next to grow heaps more food from your garden. And make sure you check out the description below, because I'll pop any links that I have to recipes on my blog, to other articles, to other videos that are going to be relevant that I've discussed in this video. So if you are looking for anything in particular, I will pop them all in the description, so check that out as well.